the world has a big food system. Each of those food systems are unique in the places that we live. And so getting people to understand how we need to change things, how we need to change the way we eat, the way we grow, the way we transport food is really, really important. And that has massive impacts for not only human health, but also planetary health.
Food is the one common thread that connects people world over. The narrative surrounding food has been constantly evolving, and one man has made good food for all his life's goal. He steered the conversation towards sustainability and the future of food. It is my pleasure to be speaking today about a topic I am so passionate about to someone who is definitely an expert in this field. My background research process usually just takes a few hours, but I was so engrossed in this topic that I spent a little over 6 hours just watching his videos. It is such a pleasure to hear him speak at length on the topic, and the Australian accent definitely helps. Today, we have with us Paul Newnham, the director of SDG2 Advocacy Hub and the facilitator of Chef's Manifesto. So I couldn't be happier to have you here with us today. For the uninitiated, if you could just tell us a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals and in particular SDG2.
Yeah, thank you. It's so great to be with you today. So the Sustainable Development Goals are a set of goals that were signed on to by every country in the world in the year 2015. And they're essentially a plan for addressing some of the biggest issues the world faces. And so these goals were designed to be integrated, to look across the many challenges and to create an agenda, I suppose, for governments, for all of us to really address some of the big issues that we face. And so these goals go from, no poverty to zero hunger, through to education, to environment, to cities, to economic development. There's all kinds of elements built in. And they're designed to set targets, to set a way for countries to think about the transformation that needs to happen. And so within that, there's regular conversations, there's regular meetings, there's regular projects being set around helping to kind of work on these goals. And so within those goals, there's a goal, SDG, and we call them Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs, but essentially they're a plan. And within that, there's goal 2 is built around the idea of food, agriculture, and nutrition. And it looks at, it's tagged zero hunger, but it's more than just fighting hunger. It's got hunger in it. It's also got nutrition. It's also got biodiversity, it's got climate change, it's got impact goals around farmers and smallholder farmers. And so it looks at things in an integrated, joined up way. And I think as an agenda, that's really important. And so my role is to work on leading and coordinating the advocacy hub for the Sustainable Development Goal 2, which helps to bring together UN, private sector, civil society to help them to communicate, connect and catalyze really action around these goals. There's, the world has a big food system. Each of those food systems are unique in the places that we live. And so getting people to understand how we need to change things, how we need to change the way we eat, the way we grow, the way we transport food is really, really important. And that has massive impacts for not only human health, but also planetary health.
So I saw that you have a policy breakdown. You have 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 to 2.4, 2.5. Can you probably elaborate a little more on that? That's something I saw on the websites.
Yeah, so under each of the 17 goals, there's actually sub-goals, and these are indicators, and there's indicators under each. And so in goal 2, there's these indicators around, so there's 5 indicators and 3 sub-indicators. And these 5 indicators are around, as I was mentioning, ending hunger, looking at nutrition, and this is over and under nutrition. So it's looking at not just getting enough nutrition, but also the challenges of getting the right nutrition. And so that impacts on, you know, the triple burdens of malnutrition around obesity, overweight, underweight, and the like. And then you've also got looking at the productivity of smallholder farmers. And so how are we ensuring smallholder farmers are actually as productive as they're able, and what's required for that? And that's really interesting when you think about where are the investments needed? How do you help people to really increase productivity? So it can be, you know, on the farm, it can also be, you know, in research and development, it can be in so many different areas. And then it also looks at climate impacts and how do we think about climate adaptation, so adapting to changing climates, which many farmers are having to do because the world is changing very quickly. And then also biodiversity, and biodiversity is really important, you know, when you think about the fact that there's 30,000 edible plants approximately in the world, and our diets on the whole are made up from about 150. And our calories, the calories that we get, you know, the majority of the world are made up 60% from 5 different ingredients. And so when you think about that and you think about 30,000, and then you come down to about 150 are what we're really utilizing. And then within that, there's 5 that we really make up the majority of our diets, you know, rice, potatoes, wheat, you know, corn, these things that we're very familiar with no matter where in the world you live. You need to think about, well, how do we increase that biodiversity? And so these sub-goals, these targets, these priorities are designed to actually show you can't just focus on one area, you've got to fix all of these areas to actually really develop something that's sustainable.
So do you have any recent statistics on how many people still may be going to bed hungry, or anything related to this matter? Any recent statistics that you have with you that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, at the moment, there's a report that comes out every year, and it's obviously reporting on the previous year. You can't report on things that haven't happened. So we're always looking backwards slightly. And so the state of food security, food insecurity is a report called the SOFI. And the SOFI report it came out in 2020. It talks about between 720 and 811 million people faced hunger in 2020. And this is rising at the moment. And it's been rising for the last 6 years due to conflict, climate, and more recently COVID. So these 3 C's are really impacting, because when climate affects food, it affects migration, it affects all kinds of things. If there's a flood, there's a disaster, there's lack of rain, too much rain, you know, all of these things, they affect the ability for us to grow food, for people to get food. Conflict is the same. If there's conflict on, it's very hard to farm in conflict. It's very hard to have systems that work and to be able to get food. And then COVID has also been such a big issue. And so within that, that's, you know, 720 to 811. And it's a bit of a range because it is, you know, lots of things are changing and moving, and it's hard to kind of get those exact numbers. The other thing that's another stat that's really key is that 3 billion people in the world cannot afford a healthy diet. So that, and within that, 1 in 3 are malnourished. And this is something that's really quite concerning, because when we think about nutrition, we're talking about getting the right micro and macronutrients to be healthy, to be able to thrive. This is really important when children, with pregnant women, with children as they're young in that first 1,000 days, because it's all about their development. And sometimes if the wrong nutrients aren't there, you can never recover from that because you're not developing. At the same time, what we're seeing is that in some parts of the world, people are moving from being undernourished in terms of not having enough calories, nutrients, to then having too many calories and becoming, you know, obesity, overweight issues, but then not getting the right nutrients still. So you can still be getting too many calories, but not getting the right nutrients. And so there's these kinds of challenges that are facing. At the moment, also, when we think about the environment, agriculture accounts for more than 1/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions. So you can't talk about climate, you can't care about climate without thinking about food and agriculture. It uses 70% of fresh water. And so in different parts of the world, water has become scarce. I know in there's been cities where they've had to ration, all these kinds of issues. But at the same time, billions of people around the world earn their living from planting seeds, from preparing meals in restaurants. So food's sort of this key component to all of our identities, to who we are and how our economies flourish. And we've seen that with the lockdowns that have happened around the world. We've seen restaurants close, we've seen schools close, and that's had an impact even on school meals, which some children in some parts of the world, that school meal is critical and parents count on it. And then it's been taken away. And you've seen these kinds of things play out, even in places like the UK, where you saw Marcus Rashford, the Manchester United player, really advocating about school meals because they'd been taken away. And so you see this happening all over the world. It's not just a developing context or a developed context or in everything in between. Those terms are very hard sometimes to even apply in today's world because everywhere has challenges, and we all have things that are developing and developed, but it's about inequality often in many of the parts of the world.
So I think when we're having this discussion, it's not just about the quantity of food, it's probably even the quality of food that we're talking about, right?
Yeah. So the quantity and quality is really important. Often we've talked about when we see a problem, if somebody's hungry, you want to give them food, but you need to give them the right food. And if you don't give them the right food, then they can have too much of the wrong food. They cannot get the nutrients. And so it's really important for us to learn more about food. And this is not about diets or that kind of thing. It's about health, and it's about human health. And human health, it's about the macronutrients which we find in food, the calories, and that creates the ability for us to thrive and be our best. And so I think it's really important when we think about that, because there's so many impacts that happen if we don't get that right.
Okay, so from my understanding, from all the videos I've watched of you and what you do online, so a lot of what you do comes from urging people to come together and, collaborate to sort of achieve a common goal. And I feel like the SDG2 Advocacy Hub is just an extension of that. So can you tell me what are the little things that, me and probably my colleagues and my family can do to positively impact, how the world is going to eat and how it's going to impact the planet?
Yeah, so I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed when you talk about big global issues and all of a sudden then you retract into your own space. But the reality is that every one of us eats something, hopefully every day. Some people eat 5 small meals, other people eat 1 big meal, some people, eat 3 meals. Everyone eats something. It could be on the go to work, it could be at home with your family, it could be anywhere. And each time we sit down to eat, we often are faced with a choice. And even no matter where you live in the world, there's choices. There's choices about what you choose to eat, who you eat with, where you source it from, everything. And people sometimes say, look, we don't have those choices, but I've seen these choices everywhere. I've seen these choices in refugee camps where people have chosen to even go without food for certain periods to eat the food that they would like to eat, because food is so personal. And so I think this idea of choice is really key. So when it comes to food, I would say there's 2 things to think about. One is to think about how are you helping your own health, and also how are you helping the planet, and that then connects with the people growing the food, the impacts that food has. But so it's like, what does this food do for me and my own health, and then what does this food do for the planet? And that also is a health element as well. And so one of the things we've been working on with the United Nations is a campaign around this idea of good food for all. And it talks about food and creating food that has equity built into it to allow everyone to have access. But as part of that, we've tried to answer this question of what can you do? And we've talked about the idea of just choosing a healthy, climate-friendly meal once a week. Start with that. We've said, why don't you do it on a Sunday? When you often have a bit more time, and indulge, why don't you choose something then that's healthy and climate friendly? And it can be whatever you like to eat, but think about how that can have less of an impact on the planet and less of an impact on your health in a negative way. And so that's where I would say to start, is to make those choices. But you can then go further. You can do that every day. You can do that in all kinds of other ways. You can ask more questions about where your food comes from. You can think about the packaging it comes in. You can think about who grows it. All of these elements, depending on who you are, will allow you to make choices that can have that positive impact and help us to drive forward on achieving these goals.
That's actually perfect, because I'm someone who actually started unlearning and relearning how to go about diet and nutrition once I got pregnant, actually. And then after I had my son, I realized that he is, part of the future generation, and he needs to know what is good for him as well as for the environment. Yeah. So I'm looking at food that way now, and I think this interview has just come at the perfect time for me, because I learned so much just researching for this interview, and now speaking to you, I'm learning so much more.
No, it's great. Yeah. And I think it's like, kids are great because, you can get them to get interested in food. And this is where I also think biodiversity is great, because, one of the ways to really improve diet is to eat a diversity of foods. It's to not just eat the same thing. You eat lots of things, and working with lots of, chefs. And then I also have my own kids, you get them tasting different things. You get them trying different things. They get the textures, the flavors, the seasons, and all of that helps to, I suppose, ensure that there's a diversity in the diet, which then gives them a diversity of micro and macronutrients. It gives them that interest, and it also helps it, taste great. It makes food interesting. And when food's interesting, then you pay more attention, you invest more time, you invest more energy, and all of that makes you think more about food. And I think one of the challenges at the moment in the world we live in is that people are so distracted. There's things like these mobile phones, that people are, often eating with these phones, and they're distracted. What we need to do is get them more interested in food, more excited about food, more appreciative of the work farmers put into that food, that chefs put into pulling together dishes, parents, other, grandmothers, family. And all of that will help people to really love food, but also to think about it more and appreciate it.
Yeah. Do you have something to say about the amount of probably food wastage? A lot of food goes to waste, and there are many discussions happening around this. There are a lot of apps that I've heard about. I think since you're in the UK, you may also be aware of those that have people giving away food that's maybe close to expiry that they don't need, and sort of like just dumping it in the trash. I think that's something that we've started talking about more over the last maybe 2 to 3 years. And what is your opinion on this entire scenario around food wastage?
Yeah, look, there is a lot of focus on food wastage, and I think wasting food is not a good thing, because everything that we have grown, we've put energy into. It's taken energy, water, nutrients to grow, and so it needs to be used, and so we don't want to throw that away. But I think sometimes the focus can be it can be sometimes a little misguided in the way that we approach it, because it's kind of like, as long as you don't waste food, then it's okay. But you kind of go, well, it's actually about thinking about food in a different way. Instead of seeing it as something that's wasted, see food as something valuable. And if you see it as valuable, and I think this is a challenge because food has become cheap in some ways. It's become, you don't waste things that are not valuable. Do you know what I mean? And so we throw things away because we don't have that value in them. And so, when I've worked with different chefs, some of the chefs will talk about the fact that when you throw away food, that's throwing away money. And if you're running a restaurant, that's profit. And if you're running a house, it's savings. Do you know what I mean? And so if you think about it, you go, well, how do I use the whole thing? How do I've grown some carrots just the other day, and you take the tops off, and I made them into pesto, and I just put them in instead of basil, and it made a great pesto. So you think differently about, how do you view whole ingredients? How do we utilize them? What does that look like? Do I need to peel my vegetables? No, I can wash them. The skin's actually got all the nutrients into it. Little things like that. They're small changes, but what they do is they help you think differently. I also think then it's about being creative. It's about being creative in the kitchen, thinking about how do I utilize different things? What do I do with something that's slightly older? How do I preserve? Do I bring back techniques or ideas? Now, not everyone can do this. People are busy. And so you need to then think about it. But then I also think there's another challenge, which is I think we sometimes buy too much. We don't plan well. And so I think now there's a lot more where we should be thinking and planning our meals out. And there's lots of tools in big cities to help you do that. There's lots of groups to help with waste that does exist, to be able to share it. So I think now there's a lot more going on that enables us to really not have that excuse. You know, even in supermarkets, they're looking at smaller sizes, smaller packaging. You can buy like a half loaf of bread rather than a big loaf if you're living by yourself. And, you know, these kinds of things I think are really important. But then I also like innovation. There's lots of innovation around food waste and how do you utilize it? And that's all around the world in different ways, where groups are taking, you know, food and then repurposing it for different things. And you're seeing that in all kinds of different ways as well.
So the first time I actually heard and understood the concept of Future 50 foods is from one of your interviews. It's really fascinating stuff. I mean, is there something that after learning about this or knowing about this, is there something that you completely eliminated from your diet or included in your diet?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept. And basically, this was a report, just for those listening, this was a report that was created by the Unilever and WWF. And they basically did this research report. I've got one sitting here because I was looking at it just yesterday, actually. But it talks about foods that are good for the people, good for people and planet. And as I looked at that report, one of the things I realized was there's lots of seeds and nuts, there's lots of grains that I haven't been aware or familiar with that I've brought into my diet. So one of the things I always use that's in there is sesame seeds. I love sesame seeds. I have them on pizza. Today is actually International Pizza Day, I think. And so we use them, you know, you use sesame seeds in all kinds of things. Beetroot leaves is really good for salad as well. Sweet potatoes, all different types of beans are really amazing. I love mushrooms, and so all kinds of different types of mushrooms are great as well. So, I mean, when you start to look at food that way, you start to go, oh, how does this taste? What do I do with it? And then all of a sudden it goes into, really helps you. And you can start to just, what I like about that is that's 50, because when you think 30,000, you start to go, wow, I'm drowning. I don't know where to go. I'm lost. Whereas when you start with 50, you can start, you know, and you can go, okay, let's work our way through them.
So, I mean, one question again, related to this entire thing. So, the thing is, do you think that there may be a trend, like, for example, one of the ingredients from, you know, the Future 50 foods, like maybe spelt or wheat greens, could be on like the tasting menu of a Michelin star restaurant? Because there's this mindset that connects the use of, you know, expensive or infrequently found ingredients with luxury. So, do you think this could feature on a Michelin star menu?
Yeah. I think one of the things, like, and that's definitely, I mean, I see this on all kinds of, you know, people do go, oh, that's only for luxury chefs or restaurants. Often these ingredients, like millets, for example, millets were seen as poor people's food in India, you know, in West Africa, things like funio were seen as like what you just throw and you eat when you have no other food. You know, like people will go for white rice, but they don't have white rice, then they'll use these millets. What people are finding is these millets use a fifth less water than rice, and their nutrient level is hugely improved. So they're actually a far superior grain than rice, and yet we don't eat them. So what I've got quite a few chefs in different parts of the world that are championing these ingredients and actually saying these should be seen as very valuable ingredients, but they're not. They're not unaffordable. They're very accessible. They're actually very accessible. It's things like legumes, all kinds of beans. Beans are really good for the planet. They grow very fast. They put nitrogen back into the soil. They are very good for you. They have high protein, high nutrient levels. There's all different types, you know, but people go, oh, beans, they're cheap. They're what you eat if you don't, you know, but you see them now on Michelin star restaurant chefs, and you see them in in school lunches, food banks and shelters. You can see the ingredients they can be used in so many different ways. And what I think we need to do is just be much more interested and intrigued by these ingredients. And we need to try and bring them out and get people excited about them. And so if a Michelin star chef showcases them and gets people excited about them, and then all of a sudden people see them as more valuable, that's great. But if then the price goes out of the reach of everyone else, that's not great. So we need to kind of look at the inequalities. We need to look at all of these elements in the system as well. But why food gets cheap is because we make more of it and sell it, and then people do it on scale. So we also need to just add more to those big 5 ingredients which are used all over the world, and we've managed to get very cheap to produce. We need to add another 50 to that so that we can then have them also very affordable and accessible.
Actually, I feel like the change is already happening, because if you probably went to a restaurant in India maybe 5 years ago, you wouldn't find anything with quinoa on the menu. But now quinoa, your millets are all very, it's quite frequently found on Indian, really classy Indian restaurant menus. So I think the change is already happening. It's very slow, but it's happening for sure. So I feel like sustainability is a word that, gets thrown around quite a bit. Do you think that it is sometimes overused or misplaced? Can you tell me what, according to you, is the essence of true sustainability, especially when it comes to food?
Yeah. I mean, this is an interesting concept, because sustainability can be, it's got many dimensions, as we've just said, so looking at sustainability is, in essence of the word, is to sustain. So it's to keep the same, it's not to use more than what we've taken. In many ways, the challenge we face is that the world is beyond where, on health issues, on climate issues, is beyond just sustaining now. We're using more than we have. So we need to go into a new kind of concept of regenerative. We need to think about how do the choices we make give back, that give more than they take. And so I think, sustainability can sometimes be used to justify or to land at a particular level, rather than, I think sometimes we have to go beyond that. So I think, everything's a journey. Everyone starts somewhere. And so going from very unsustainable, we need to go to sustainable. Then I think we need to go to regenerative. And that's really thinking about how are we putting back? How are we rebuilding? How are we improving biodiversity? How are we not just sustaining it where it is, but bringing back new elements, bringing back new nature spaces, more tree cover, better environments, all of these elements, how we're giving back and regenerating people's health, all of those elements. So I think that for me, it's this challenge of you don't want to demonize anything, because, everyone's starting somewhere, and it's important the movement we're going in. So we need to be moving away from unsustainable practices to sustainable, and then we need to be moving from sustainable into regenerative, is my view.
Okay, that's actually very beautiful. I love that. Yes. So you have that huge Chef's Manifesto banner behind you. I want to know more about it. Please tell me.
So we were looking at, when we first started the Sustainable Development Goal 2 Advocacy Hub, we were looking at how do we really think about bringing food back into the conversation around food, agriculture, and nutrition? Because sometimes it can become very scientific. So you start talking about nutrients, you talk about agriculture, and it disconnects from food. We're talking about commodities, economics, we're talking about health. And so we said, yeah, but the challenge is you can tell somebody this is what's good for you and they won't eat it. So it's not education only, it's not knowledge only, it's also flavor and taste. Each of us is born in a particular place, in a particular environment. We eat certain things when we feel sad, we eat other things when we celebrate. Flavors bring back memories, they're tied to our culture, our palate. And so we need to think about food coming at the center. And if we want to drive change, we have to acknowledge that. And so we also wanted to recognize that chefs play a connecting point in the food system between the products that are grown and the people that eat them. And chefs understand food. They spend all day working with ingredients, trying to get out flavor, and they get instant feedback. They put a plate in front of you, you either eat it or you don't. You let them know one way or another, either verbally or non-verbally, whether you like that. Mm-hmm. And so they understand people. And so we said, let's think about how these chefs that are involved in so many parts of our lives can have a real voice around sustainability. And what we found was that they were talking about lots of issues. There were chefs talking about food waste, and they were talking about seasonality, and they were talking about biodiversity. But there wasn't a connection to the UN frameworks, the government frameworks that were there. And so we helped chefs to work with them, and we did a survey. We engaged with chefs, and there was chefs across 35 countries that helped form these 8 thematic areas which connect to the Sustainable Development Goals. And under them, there's a set of actions that chefs can take to really drive action around the SDGs. And so this was something that we kind of worked with them over time. And we've now developed that into a network over 90 countries, thousands of chefs that are engaged in thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals and thinking about how they can educate people on different issues, whether that's to help them think about different ingredients like we've talked about, to think about their impact on the ocean, on climate, on human health, all these issues. And so now that's a way to kind of bring people together into a conversation around that.
Okay. So I saw something about the Chef's Manifesto having representation at the Dubai Expo 2020. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, so we've had Chef's Manifesto has been at Expo Dubai 2020 a couple of times, and we've actually got some chefs going again for the Food and Agriculture Week, which is coming up in February. But we had some there for the Global Goals Week, which was in January, and then we've got some more coming for February. And so chefs are going there from different parts of the world. They're curating conversations, they're speaking alongside experts to really kind of bring that chef perspective into the conversation, into the global dialogues, the global debates that are happening at Expo as part of the program. And so it's really great to see that they're doing that in such a way that talks about how people eat, about the things that they're eating, the regions where that food comes from, alongside farmers and scientists. And this is something that I think is really important, is that we all have a role to play in these goals. And Expo Dubai 2020 is really brings the world together and gathering them, thinking about this sustainability, thinking about mobility, thinking about the opportunity, and really building almost an example city that could then bring all the countries of the world together. And in that, there's a lot of food. Everyone eats and everyone brings food from their own culture. And we need to think about those ingredients, think about those dialogues. And so we've been working alongside to really bring that voice and make sure that that voice is being heard. And also that people are able to taste some of these great, treats as well.
That's nice. So I need to know, can you give me an idea of what you eat? Probably what did you eat all day today? Just to get an idea of what probably the, best kind of diet for you and your planet is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this morning I started out with a bread with some chili, some pesto stuff, some rocket, just whatever I found. I found some tomatoes from our garden, cut them up, salt and pepper. It was just beautiful as a starting point. I'm basically vegetarian, and so we eat very, very little animal-based products in our diet. Some cheese, some eggs. That's about really it. And so then we had a meatball sort of styled dish. So it's lots of vegetables. You grab whatever vegetables are available. So it's a tomato base. We had onions, carrots, zucchini, lots of these kinds of different vegetables, all made into a kind of sauce, a ragu kind of thing. And then we have these plant-based sort of meatballs, which are made out of like a chickpea, and beans, and then you put them into the oven. They just go a bit crispy on the outside. You put them into this sauce, and they're really, really great. So that's what we ate today. But you know, in our meals often we'll have you know, beans. There's like a chickpea curry. There's you know, I do a lot of pizza. I really like pizza, and we make our own with different ingredients. We've got a really good vegetable garden that we grow some vegetables in, and so at the moment I've got lots of different things growing, and so we'll harvest some of that and have that. But it's really about trying to get a variety of foods. We eat a lot of like sweet potatoes and different types of foods that have, you know, higher nutrient quantities in them. So it's great. Yeah.
I mean, I just love talking about food, and this conversation is making me really happy. Yeah.
No, that's great. And I mean, this is the thing. I think this is the thing that we forget sometimes, is that food is something that is really enjoyable on the whole. Like it's something that brings back memories. It makes you smile. Even if you're hungry, it makes you smile. And you think about it and you go, how do we, what do we, you know, how do we use this as a positive way to really celebrate food, but to also advocate that everyone should have food that does this for them, that gives them the nutrients, that brings joy, that is pleasurable. Like, you know, saving the world doesn't have to be miserable. It can be enjoyable. It can be tasty. It can be, you know, a celebration.
Correct. Yeah. That's wonderful. And I think, have you tried food from India, from Kerala? I believe you've been raised in India for a while, right? So have you tried Kerala food? You might love it. It's very, very, very healthy. And
yes.
Actually.
Pardon?
A lot of our foods are plant-based.
Yes. No, I love. So I lived in southern India for a little while, and right on the border of Kerala. I was in Tamil Nadu, just across on the mountains. So it was very close. But yeah, no, a lot of the foods, you know, lots of dals, lots of lentils. I mean, one of the things about Indian food is that biodiversity is not a problem. There is so many different diverse foods. And so this is really, really important. And yeah, really helps to really drive that.
Yeah. I think, I mean, there was this point of time when I was having a few health issues and I decided to switch to a plant-based diet. And that's when I realized, because I started like re-looking at the recipes that I already had. And I was like, most of Keralite food a lot of Indian food actually is very nutritious. And at the same time, it's all mostly plant-based, you know, and that actually helped fix a lot of issues for me. So even now I don't have a lot of milk or animal products or cheese, but yeah, I really saw the difference after I went plant-based.
No, it's absolutely. And I mean, I grew up eating like meat and vegetables all the time, you know, meat and 3 vegetables in Australia. It was very challenging, but then that's kind of what you got used to. And then I was like, the more I learned, it became more plant-based. And I mean, people see it as, you know, I think sometimes the challenge is people go, you're either a meat eater or you're vegan, but there's this whole world in between, which is to eat less meat, to eat more plants, and to have that diversity in diet. And I think that's really important. And I think, you know, when we think about this, we need to stop these polarizing conversations, but really bring food out, make people interested, and get them to really think creatively about how do they find what they need. So I think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a discussion that even I, you know, kind of have with my family a lot. So I need to know what's your opinions on like mukbangs on YouTube? What do you think of them? Do you binge watch them or do you not like the concept at all?
I mean, I don't really watch them, to be honest, because it's an interesting concept. There's been a few times where I've kind of looked at it and gone, this is really interesting. I mean, watching other people eat is a kind of interesting concept to me. Because I'm like, I'd rather enjoy eating. But what it does to me is it shows that connection to food. I mean, when you think about it, I think on Instagram, you know, 1 in 3 photos is about food. So food is so central to who we are. And yet we don't sometimes value it or protect it in the level that we need to. You know, we don't think about food and think about the right everyone should have to eat really good food, to be able to enjoy that. And I think this is really critical. So when you think about some of these things online, I think, there's so many great cooking shows. I'm a bigger fan of cooking shows or travel shows that talk about food than watching other people eat. I kind of like the idea of watching other people cook, and then I like to go and eat myself.
Okay. Yeah. Did you have a guide or a mentor in the field? I would assume not, because even though food is a very widely spoken about topic, you are operating within a rather niche industry. So is there someone who you could look up to?
So I've worked with lots of different people. So because I'm kind of working between spaces, I've worked with people in the development space, the development community, thinking about that. And there's been a lot of different people that I've kind of read and learned from. And then in the food space, there's lots of chefs that have really been very influential, that have thought a lot about food, that have looked into traditions, culture, sustainability practices. And that's also been really, really interesting and helpful in trying to kind of understand food. And so I'm a bit more eclectic. I look across different fields, and then I also really like learning from people who, academics that are thinking about research and science, because I also think there's a lot of connection between science in lots of fields, and the food that we eat and how we eat and how we enjoy and how we think. Even the marketing, you were talking about these YouTube clips, even the way why do people think that way? Why do people enjoy watching that? And what does it do for them? And it connects them. It gives them a sense of belonging, to be a part of a network, a community. And when we sit around a table, that's the same thing. But in so many parts of the world now, we eat in isolation. We don't sit around a table. We eat on the way to work. We eat by ourselves. We eat watching YouTube. We don't eat with a family or with a group of friends around the table. It's interesting, one of the things with COVID, with the lockdowns, people noticed the most was that lack of connection. And that's something that's really, really important. And that's something that connects with our food as well.
With my skill set and my passion for food, how do you think that I possibly could contribute to participate with the SDG2 Advocacy?
Yeah, so I think the way that you could really make a difference around advocacy on SDG2 is the choices you make around food. You can make active choices where you are locally to think about where your food comes from, what food you're eating, and how that's impacting the environment and your own health. And then educate people about that. Educate them about ingredients, educate them about the impacts that food can have. Tell stories about that. I mean, telling stories is absolutely critical to educate people and to get their interest. I remember I was in New York and I was standing in a room and I raised something about a grain, and somebody was from the other side of the room said, "Sorry, can I just interrupt you? What did you say it was? And can you just tell me about," people are fascinated about food. So having more people talking about food, talking about where it comes from, who's growing it, what does it do to you? Does it impact? All of those things is really important. And that helps us to rise this up as an issue for our leaders in government to make decisions around, for business to be, make the right decisions around, and for individuals to also make the right choices around. And I think when that happens, we can transform our system, the food system, we can make it better for everyone. And then also really think about that equality, that the SDGs are really about everyone, for all. And so it's about how do we also make sure that everyone has access.
Yeah. So just before we leave, I want to know, is there one food that you think has a really detrimental effect on probably the environment that you can educate us about? I've heard that palm oil is really bad, and it's both for the health as well as for the environment. Is there something else, or is there something that you could add to this?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I don't like to do is kind of demonize one food over another. But what I prefer to do is to say, because the food itself is not always bad. It's how we use it and how much. It's like people talk about sugar and they say sugar's bad. Well, actually, no, just eating a lot of sugar is really bad. Having a very small amount is not a bad thing. And it's not sugar's problem, it's how we eat sugar and what it does to our system. So to me, all of these kinds of things are really challenging, and thoughtful. So I would say, anything that's really, big uses of water, big uses of environment that has very low nutritional value is not great. And so, I would say eat more diverse foods rather than think about what you shouldn't eat. Just eat more of lots of different things and then get that diversity. And then that creates a much better, I think, approach and conversation.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and
but the reason palm oil, as an example, the reason palm oil is because the way it's farmed, the way that it, all of those elements. So you've got to investigate that and look into that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't you shouldn't have that, but there's all different types of palm oil as well. There's red palm oil, which actually is very highly nutritious and is grown in West Africa, Nigeria, and a friend of mine was telling me about it. And it's got nothing to do with the palm oil that, is being from forests coming down. And so there's like lots more nuance in this food conversation that I think we need to think about rather than just demonizing one thing over another. We need to ask more questions about food.
Okay, that's great. I think it's been such a wonderful talk. It's lovely to have you here on our show. We're looking forward to having you hopefully like it and come back and educate us a little more.
I'd love to do that.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Neha, to talk with you. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing the show.